What if the calmest man in the room was also the most dangerous? It's easy to mistake a smile for softness, to believe that composure equals fragility. But history has proven, time and time again, that some of the strongest warriors wear their armor on the inside. Before the world knew him as a Hollywood icon, before the headlines and the blockbusters, Tom Cruise was just a boy fighting invisible battles. He grew up with instability, moving from place to place, never rooted long enough to feel at home. Behind closed doors, there were hardships that shaped him far more than any movie role ever could. Pain wasn't a guest, it was a roommate. And yet, in the middle of that chaos, he learned something few people ever master: restraint. Where others shouted, he listened. Where others folded, he observed. And slowly, he discovered that silence could be sharper than any blade. As a child, Tom was underestimated, often overlooked, sometimes dismissed altogether. He didn't come from privilege, he didn't have a safety net, and he certainly didn't have an easy path carved out for him. Every laugh, every smirk, every careless insult thrown his way left an imprint. But instead of breaking, those moments became the fuel. And that's where the story begins. Not with fame, not with fortune, but with a boy whose greatest power was forged long before cameras ever found him. The smile you see today, it isn't just charisma. It's a shield. And behind it is a storm waiting for the right moment to break free. Before the red carpets, before the flashing cameras, Tom lived in the shadow of constant change. His childhood was a revolving door of new schools, new towns, and new faces. By the time most kids had built lifelong friendships, Tom had already packed his bags more times than he could count. It wasn't adventure, it was survival. Each move was another reminder that stability was a luxury his family couldn't afford. But it wasn't just the chaos of moving. At home, the young boy faced another storm. His father was unpredictable, sometimes stern, other times explosive. Tom once described him as a bully, a man who could switch from calm to cruel without warning. For a child, this meant walking on eggshells, reading the room with precision, learning when to speak and when to stay silent. It was in those moments of tension that Tom developed a skill most people spend a lifetime chasing: control. He discovered that words could wound deeper than fists, and silence could diffuse even the most volatile situations. These weren't lessons from textbooks or classrooms. They were lessons carved into him by experience. Teachers saw a boy who struggled in school, often misunderstood and sometimes written off. Classmates saw someone quiet, guarded, maybe even strange. But beneath the surface, Tom was studying people, learning how to respond without reacting, how to stand his ground without raising his voice. He wasn't just surviving, he was building an armor of composure. And though nobody knew it at the time, those early scars were shaping the very man who would one day redefine what strength looks like in front of millions. Every legend begins in obscurity, and Tom's story was no different. In school, he wasn't the golden boy. He wasn't the star athlete nor the brilliant student teachers bragged about. He wrestled with dyslexia, words on a page often blurring and twisting until reading felt like climbing a mountain with no summit. While others soared ahead, he sat in silence, frustrated, misunderstood, and left behind. To many, it looked like weakness, but to Tom, it became training. Each failure was a lesson in endurance. Each struggle taught him how to fight battles no one else could see. When others gave up, he pushed harder, not because it was easy, but because stopping wasn't an option. And then, something unexpected happened. Amid the setbacks, he found escape in performance. On stage, the confusion of words didn't matter. What mattered was energy, presence, and conviction. He discovered that he could transform into someone else, someone fearless. Acting wasn't just a hobby, it was liberation. For a few moments, he could silence the chaos in his head and command a room with nothing but his voice and his gaze. But make no mistake, this wasn't a fairy tale beginning. Tom wasn't handed opportunity, and the world didn't suddenly embrace him. For now, he was still just a boy in small-town schools, dabbling in plays, chasing fragments of belonging. What no one realized was that those fragments were the sparks of a fire destined to burn far brighter than anyone could. Imagine the boy who once struggled to read the page was already preparing to write his own story and rewrite the rules of Hollywood itself. For most kids, the world feels wide open, filled with possibilities. For Tom, the world felt narrow, fenced in by doubt, his own and everyone else's. Teachers saw a student who struggled to keep up. Classmates noticed the quiet boy who moved too often to build roots. Even relatives sometimes wondered what his future could possibly hold. Success seemed like a story written for other people. At home, the turbulence continued. His family scraped by, often unsure of what came next. Money was scarce, stability even scarcer. The young Tom carried that uncertainty like a weight, even when he tried to hide it behind laughter or a stubborn grin. Dreams weren't handed out freely in his world. They had to be carved from stone, piece by piece, against the odds. Still, there was something about him that no one could quite name. Even when he stumbled, he never stopped moving. Even when he was overlooked, his eyes carried a quiet defiance, as if daring life to try and break him. That restless energy often pushed him into unusual places. Sports, wrestling, odd jobs, anything that tested him. Anything that gave him a chance to prove, if only to himself, that he was more than what people assumed. But beneath the surface, there was a growing hunger, an ache for something bigger, something that couldn't be contained by small towns or narrow expectations. He didn't know it yet, but every moment of instability, every insult, every doubt planted a seed. Seeds that would one day explode into ambition so fierce it would change not just his own life, but the landscape of cinema itself. By the time he was a teenager, Tom had lived a dozen lives in half the time. Every move, every classroom, every fleeting friendship left him with the same question. Where do I belong? He wasn't the top student. He wasn't the local hero. He was simply the kid who came and went, a face people barely remembered once he was gone. But while others saw a boy on the margins, Tom felt something stirring within him. It wasn't clear, it wasn't defined, but it was restless. He tested himself constantly, searching for an outlet that matched the fire inside. Wrestling mats gave him a taste of discipline. Work after school taught him grit. Yet nothing fit, not completely. There was always a sense that he was built for something else, though no one, not even Tom himself, could name it yet. At the same time, the weight of failure pressed in. Dyslexia made school feel like a battlefield. Teachers doubted him, peers underestimated him, and the world kept reminding him of the limits stacked against him. For many, that would have been the end of the story. Another kid lost to circumstance. But Tom wasn't built to surrender. Every challenge carved sharper edges into his will. Every doubt made him more determined. And though he couldn't yet see the path ahead, he felt the pull of destiny. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. He was standing at the edge of something. The world saw a boy struggling to find his place. What they didn't see was that, in silence, he was preparing to step into a place no one thought he belonged. The spotlight. It happened almost by accident. A school play, a role most students didn't even want, ended up in Tom's hands. For the first time, he stood beneath the hot glare of stage lights, not as the quiet kid who struggled in classrooms, but as someone else entirely. The boy who was once overlooked suddenly had every eye fixed on him. And something clicked. For a moment, the weight of dyslexia, the instability of constant moves, the doubts of teachers and peers, all of it fell away. On that stage, Tom wasn't bound by his flaws. He was free. He discovered that performance wasn't about words on a page. It was about conviction. It was about presence, timing, energy, qualities he had been honing unconsciously his whole life. The applause was small, modest, but to him it was thunder. It wasn't fame he craved. It was validation, proof that he could connect, that he could be seen, that he had something worth giving. And in that moment, the restless fire inside of him found its match. But like every spark, it came with danger. Acting was a dream, and dreams in his world were fragile things. Few believed it could be a real future. His family struggled to make ends meet. The idea of chasing roles and scripts seemed almost absurd. And yet, for Tom, there was no going back. He had tasted the stage, and it lit a hunger he couldn't ignore. The boy who once fought to be noticed now had a weapon: performance. And though the world didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a climb that would defy every expectation. Dreams rarely arrive with clear directions. For Tom, the path from restless teenager to aspiring actor was filled with uncertainty, risk, and more than a little fear. But by now, fear was something he understood intimately. It had followed him his whole life. What he didn't understand was compromise. And so, when the moment came, he decided to gamble everything. Leaving behind the familiarity of small-town life, Tom stepped into the unforgiving world of auditions and casting calls. There were no guarantees, no safety nets, only rejection after rejection. Each one stung, but each one also sharpened his resolve. If he could endure years of doubt from teachers, peers, and even family, then a closed door in Hollywood wasn't going to break him. There were nights he questioned everything, whether the sacrifice was worth it, whether he had been foolish to believe the stage could save him. But then there were moments, glimpses. The rare audition where a casting director paused, looked at him, and saw not just another hopeful face but a spark of something different. Those moments, brief as they were, fueled him. They hinted at a possibility too great to ignore. This was the turning point. Not a grand victory, not an overnight success, but a decision. The decision to keep climbing, no matter how many times the world tried to pull him down. And while no one yet knew his name, Hollywood was about to discover what Tom had always known deep down. He wasn't here to fit in. He was here to stand apart. Every climb has a moment where the air feels thinner, sharper, where you realize you've reached higher than you ever thought possible. For Tom, that moment came when the endless cycle of auditions finally cracked open and gave him his first shot. A small role, a fleeting moment on screen, but to him it was everything. It wasn't about the paycheck. It wasn't about the recognition. It was about validation, that the risks, the rejections, the restless nights hadn't been for nothing. He had stepped into the world he once only dreamed of, and for the first time, he could see a path forward. But with opportunity came pressure. Hollywood wasn't forgiving, and one mistake could erase all progress. Tom knew he couldn't afford to be average. He threw himself into the work with relentless focus, treating even the smallest role like the performance of a lifetime. Directors noticed. Fellow actors noticed. Behind the scenes, whispers began. There was something different about this kid, something sharp, something unshakable. That first break didn't make him a star, not yet, but it cracked the door wide enough for him to push through. And once Tom had a foot inside, there was no force strong enough to drag him back out. What the world didn't know was that this wasn't just the start of a career. It was the birth of a persona, a man who would captivate, challenge, and redefine what it meant to command a room. The boy who once lived in shadows had finally stepped into the light. The industry had seen countless hopefuls before, faces that flickered briefly on screen, only to vanish into obscurity. But Tom was different. From his first noticeable roles, there was an intensity in his performances that made audiences lean closer. He didn't just act, he inhabited. He carried the same sharp focus that had been forged in his turbulent childhood, and it translated into something magnetic on screen. One role led to another, and soon the small parts grew larger. Hollywood's spotlight, once so distant, now blazed directly on him. Films that could have easily swallowed an inexperienced actor became stepping stones. Tom wasn't intimidated by the scale. He thrived in it. His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was survival, sculpted from years of doubt and struggle, and the audiences noticed. They weren't just watching an actor. They were witnessing the birth of a presence, a force that refused to be ignored. Directors wanted him. Studios bet on him. He was no longer just another name on the call sheet. He was becoming the name people wanted to see above the title. But with rising fame came a new kind of challenge. The whispers grew louder. Was he too ambitious, too intense, too different? Stardom was a gift, but it was also a spotlight that never turned off. For every cheer, there was criticism. For every fan a skeptic on Tom's response, composure. He didn't fight with noise. He didn't crumble under scrutiny. He simply kept moving forward, one role at a time, transforming doubt into momentum. And slowly, the boy who once struggled to read was becoming a man whose story the entire world wanted to watch. By the time most actors were still clawing for recognition, Tom had already carved his name into the walls of Hollywood. Blockbusters followed one after another, each performance stacking his reputation higher until he wasn't just a star, he was a phenomenon. The kid once dismissed in classrooms now had his face lit up on billboards across the world. What set him apart wasn't just talent, it was obsession. While others treated acting as a job, Tom treated it as a calling. He demanded more of himself than any director ever could. He pushed past limits, rehearsed until perfection felt routine, and dove into roles with the precision of a soldier preparing for battle. When audiences watched him, they weren't simply entertained, they believed. Soon, his name wasn't attached to movies. Movies were attached to his name. Mission Impossible, Top Gun, films that defined eras, cementing him not only as a box office giant but as a cultural touchstone. Wherever he went, the crowds followed. Journalists wanted answers. Fans wanted pieces of him. Critics wanted to test him. And yet, through the chaos of superstardom, the same composure that carried him as a boy remained unshaken. He never shouted for attention. He didn't need to. His silence, his smile, his unwavering gaze, those did the heavy lifting. At the summit of fame, Tom Cruise had become more than an actor. He was a symbol, a reminder that the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary heights. But even here, under the brightest lights, challenges would come. Tests that would prove that greatness isn't about reaching the top, but staying there. At the top of the mountain, the air is thin, and so is the margin for error. Fame isn't just applause, it's a magnifying glass. Every word, every choice, every silence is dissected, amplified, twisted. For Tom, the climb was hard, but staying there would prove even harder. Interviews turned into battlegrounds. Some journalists came with curiosity, others with knives hidden behind their questions. They wanted to catch him off guard, strip away the composed veneer, expose a crack in the armor. But instead of shouting or unraveling, Tom did something more disarming. He stayed calm. Where others might have erupted, he dismantled. Where others might have retreated, he leaned in. Controversies swirled. His personal beliefs, his fierce opinions, his refusal to play the Hollywood game the way others did, all became fuel for debate. And still, he never flinched. He didn't beg for approval. He didn't try to please everyone. He met confrontation with precision, turning accusations into opportunities to display restraint. But the cost was real. For every blockbuster, there was a headline waiting to cast a shadow. For every fan, a critic eager to question his authenticity. It was a trial by fire, one that tested not just his career, but his character. Yet, through it all, the boy who had grown up learning the power of silence never forgot the lesson. Storms pass, but control endures. He didn't need to win every battle. He only needed to outlast them. And in doing so, he transformed from a star into something greater, an icon forged in controversy but defined by composure. When the credits eventually roll on a career like Tom's, what remains isn't just the box office numbers or the awards. It's the example, the story of a boy who was underestimated, dismissed, even ridiculed, who rose to the heights of global fame not through outbursts or shortcuts, but through discipline, resilience, and an unshakable calm. Tom Cruise didn't simply play heroes on screen. He embodied the principles that make them unforgettable. He showed that strength isn't about shouting the loudest, but about holding steady when the world tries to shake you. He proved that composure is its own kind of power, one that silences critics, disarms adversaries, and inspires millions without ever raising its voice. His journey is more than Hollywood legend. It's a blueprint for anyone who's ever been underestimated, anyone told they weren't enough, anyone who has stared down failure and wondered if they'd ever find their place. The lesson is simple but profound. Your greatest weapon isn't fury or noise, it's control. It's refusing to let the world define you. It's standing tall when every force is trying to push you down. So the next time life tests you, the next time doubt creeps in or criticism cuts deep, remember the boy who couldn't read a page but went on to write his own destiny. Remember the man who turned silence into strength, because composure isn't weakness. It's warning. And if Tom Cruise taught us anything, it's this: you don't have to shout to make history. You just have to stand unshaken.